Hello there, and welcome to Module 4, Existential and Humanistic Theories in Counseling. We're getting to the point in the course that is probably my favorite because I very, very much use existential therapeutic approaches as my foundation. Although I bring in some techniques from other therapies, I'm most excited about the existential and the humanistic theories that we're going to study. We'll be studying two humanistic theories, person-centered, founded by Carl Rogers, and Gestalt, founded by Fritz and Laura Perls. And you notice right up front that this module lasts a little longer. We actually have 3 weeks in this module, so it's a time to slow down a little bit, which I think after the first two modules we are overdue for doing. So first, without any further discussion, I would like to just talk about what these theories have as common ground. The existential and humanistic theories in counseling have as common ground the fact that they are so based in the 19th and early 20th century philosophy. The philosophers are really, really important behind these. And we'll talk about that just a little bit more as we get into the theories. But first, let's look at what objectives we're actually meeting here. From your syllabus, objective number 4, all about the psychodynamic theories, the founders, the basic assumptions, key concepts, primary techniques, and role of the counselor, and the multicultural considerations. And so you see there as the second grouping of theories from the syllabus, we have existential and humanistic. So let's look at D2L content just a moment here. First of all, we have PowerPoint presentations. This presentation will be in D2L, and there's also a pretty long presentation just on the theories themselves. There are videos in D2L that you will be watching, and there are several of them. The directions for study includes more information and specific information about getting to these videos. But let me take them real quickly, one at a time here. Irvin Yalom is perhaps the most well-known existential therapist. This is Irvin Yalom's book on existential psychotherapy. Now, you can see why I would have this, because I consider existential as one of my foundational theories. But we could be spending not only a whole semester, but probably 3 semesters and a lifetime on really learning about existential theory. I love this offering that we have in D2L content. We have actually a live case consultation with Irv himself, doing a consultation with another therapist on one of that therapist's clients. So you'll see that, and Irv Yalom always will be connected with the existential psychotherapy and all of the trappings of existentialism. Then we move into a video from John Carlson and Diane Keoghs of the humanistic psychotherapies and something about them. Now, you're not going to be watching the whole thing of either Irv Yalom or the John Carlson and Keoghs videos. So your directions for study will be very specific about which ones you watch. I mean, if you watch the whole thing, they're just entirely too long. There's also a third video of Rollo May. Rollo May is known as he's more the American father of existential psychotherapy before even Irv Yalom. But I'm not asking you to watch that video. It's there if you are interested at all and you have some time to, fiddle around with existentialism. But you do not need to watch the Rollo May video. Then, once we get past the first part of the module, which is existentialism and existential psychotherapy, we'll get into person-centered and Gestalt. Carl Rogers actually is live in a demonstration with a woman named Gloria doing person-centered psychotherapy. And then Fritz Perls himself is with the same woman, Gloria, doing a demonstration of Gestalt therapy. Something that I really think is important that you know about these videos, okay? First of all, they were done back in probably the 50s. And Gloria definitely has the 50s look and the hairdo and the, smoking in the session and all that. So it's very interesting. Also, it's the other thing I want you to notice in these two videos, the Carl Rogers and the Fritz Perls demonstrations, is that was the original format of these therapies. You very rarely would see that in contemporary use of these theories today, especially Fritz Perls. I mean, Fritz Perls gets just a little antagonistic. He's narcissistic. He's, I promise you're not going to think that Fritz Perls is the most endearing person. But he does get his techniques and his point across. And with some people, they might be effective. So also in D2L content is, your 2 separate weeks or directions for study. Now, the reason it's important to separate those 2 weeks is because the week 1 content, which is all existential psychotherapy, will be on the midterm test, okay? So that study needs to take place before the Thursday and Friday. I think it's February the 20th and 21st. I'm pretty sure that's right, but it's that Thursday and Friday. It's when the midterm actually is. You won't have time to go through the whole module. So really, don't even attempt to go into the second part of the module until after the midterm test. You're going to have enough to get ready for in going back to study Module 2 and Module 3, the psychoanalytical theories. So week 1 content is included in the midterm exam. And while we're here, let me just talk to you a little bit about the midterm exam. There are 10 fill-in-the-blanks, there are 20 multiple choices, and there's 10 true-false. There's no way that you can pass this exam without having gone back and really studied the PowerPoints, the discussion forums, the being sure you know the answers to those. For instance, in Module 2, where all those questions were asked and answered by your fellow students, be sure you know those. And then, of course, in Module 3, all of the D2L content. Midterm exam takes place in the testing center. And I haven't heard from anybody to say you can't go there over those 2 days. Please check out the website via the ETSU homepage for the testing center, because the hours of operation are there. I think they close earlier on Friday than they do on Thursday, and they do require that no matter how long your test takes, that you be there at the testing center 45 minutes prior to closing. So it's not as easy as the Module 3 assessment and the Module 2 assessment, I can tell you, but if you know the content of the modules and week 1 of Module 4, you'll do fine. So 10 fill-in-the-blank, 20 multiple choice, and 10 true-false. Then let's move on to the module, or move later. You'll have the Module 4 assessment. And on it, there's 4 fill-in-the-blanks and 10 multiple choice, just a little bit more simple. And it will be on March 7th and 8th in D2L, but you don't have to go to the testing center to take it. You can take it anywhere you like. So let's talk about these discussion areas. In your study directions, you'll see exactly what you need to participate in the discussion areas. There will be 2 separate topics in this forum for Module 4. And the first topic will be 10 points maximum, and the second topic will be 10 points maximum. The first topic will be all about existential. You should be in that topic prior to taking the midterm exam. And there you have on the screen your initial post deadlines. For the first week is February the 20th, and the initial post deadline for the second week and third weeks is March the 1st, Friday, March the 1st. So there we have it with administrative notes. Let's talk about some highlights of Module 4 from an existential therapy standpoint. I mentioned the philosophy behind really all of these, the existential, person-centered, and Gestalt therapies, lies in the fact that the common ground they have is it's very, very based on 19th century and early 20th century philosophy. And mainly Kierkegaard, Martin Buber, who came up with the I-thou relationship. If you associate anything with all of these as common ground, it would certainly be the Martin Buber I-thou relationship, and how that relationship, the I-thou, meaning the counselor-therapist or counselor-therapist / and client, the I-thou relationship, leading to change, as Carl Rogers would say. And Buber would say that it allows meaning to exist. Well, that meaning gets us into that existential thought process. So in existential psychotherapy, its importance lies in the relationship to the philosophy of Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Heidegger, Buber, Sartre, so many of them. And any of you who have studied philosophy, you'll really, really associate those with the concepts of existential psychotherapy. You know, Heidegger was all about becoming aware. Sartre was a person, love his novels, who questioned existence itself, not only the meaning of existence, but the fact, are we really here? Or where are we? So certainly based in philosophy would be these existential and humanistic theories. One of the reasons I think that I am so pro-existential psychotherapy is because it lays the foundation. You know, it is really all about who that client is. And rather than having someone present with a problem and then diagnose pathology and that sort of thing, there is getting to know that client for who they are in their subjective world, which you'll hear over and over about Rogers, which you'll hear the subjective world and the meaning of the client's life in existential psychotherapy. You know, Carl Rogers actually said therapy is more a way of being than it is a way of doing. So that has a lot to do with the way person-centered psychotherapy that Carl Rogers founded actually exists. More about existential psychotherapy. It is directly connected to meaning and purpose in life. By the way, you'll probably see that on the midterm exam, meaning and purpose in life. That's all about existential. And not only is it less focused on techniques, in the whole book, in Yalom's whole book, in anything you read about existential psychotherapy, techniques are never mentioned. There's not any technique. You actually bring techniques from other therapies into use on the foundation of existential psychotherapy. It's viewed more as an approach than it is a set of techniques. And before we get to the humanistic, I would have to say a little bit more about existential because it is one of my favorites. It is very closely related also to Adlerian. If you remember going back to the Adlerian, Adler was very much about searching about the individual and who the individual is in the family constellation and that sort of thing. So it shares some background also with Adler. I mentioned Rollo May as being the father of American existential psychotherapy. One of the things that Rollo May said was, well, if you have a problem, don't come to my office because I'll send you to another therapist. And I think that's sort of the epitome of existential psychotherapy. It's not about bringing your problems in. It's about bringing the whole self and determining what gives you meaning and purpose in life, and from that context moving forward to navigate your problems, which we all have, of course. So that what brings meaning and purpose in your life, how many times must we say, and you will probably see on your exam something about meaning and purpose related to existential psychotherapy. Not probably, actually. One thing that I like about existential psychotherapy also is it really, really begins to explore the spiritual aspects of a person, spiritual as well as religious, which are obviously two very different things. And the important thing here for our use in therapy today, that while we explore the client's spirituality, there is no place in therapy for us to impose our spirituality or our religion onto the client. In fact, it's best, I think, sometimes, unless you're a pastoral counselor, to not even divulge your own personal religious or spiritual standing. This is about the client, and we don't have the imposed edicts of having what we believe as people come across to our clients in a session. And I cannot leave existential psychotherapy without also saying Yalom's, the importance that Yalom brings. I mean, almost his entire book is based on 4 things that he believes our existential existence bears upon, and that is death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness in life. You can take those letters D, F, I, M, and remember those, because you will see that as well. Death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness. So if you really know how you feel about all of those 4 areas yourself, it makes you a better therapist if then you can put yourself in the subjective world of the client and understand how they view death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness in life. Because in existential psychotherapy, there's a tenet or a concept that says really life has no meaning, that we assign the meaning to life. So those are the highlights of existential psychotherapy. I was about to get ahead of myself and go on to humanistic, which we will do now. Humanistic has 2 types of therapies, person-centered and Gestalt. We'll go over person-centered real quickly first. Founded by Carl Rogers, and here you see also the propensity of the founder to bring their own life experience into their theory. Carl Rogers was raised in a very rigid, fundamentalist household where his mother didn't really pay a lot of attention to him. And so you see some of his theory giving a lot of attention, something he didn't get. So here again, just like Adler's background, Carl Rogers brings so much of himself to the theory. He's also probably, I wouldn't say the most, but absolutely one of the most influential psychotherapists of our time and of the history of psychotherapy. And whenever you hear his name, you will first think of unconditional positive regard. There it is, unconditional positive regard, which basically means you are accepting the client where the client is, not imposing any of your judgments, rules, none of those things. Now, yes, if especially court-ordered clients come to us and they've committed crimes that we think are heinous, that can get in your way. But the point is, you are not there with the crime, you are there with the person. And no matter how heinous the crime might have been, your job as a counselor is to be totally accepting and have unconditional positive regard toward this client. In fact, a lot of research has been done that has proven that change can occur through just having the relationship of a therapist with unconditional positive regard. Lots of empirical evidence based on that fact. And Rogers espoused that is really all you needed to affect change, that with two other attributes that we will go over. So today, you won't see that alone as much. You'll see techniques brought in. You'll see questions asked that Carl Rogers would never have asked. But in its original form, person-centered therapy included the relationship. The relationship was the thing that would make the client go change things in their life. Okay? So also I should mention that it wasn't always called person-centered. It wasn't always called person-centered psychotherapy. It was first called non-directive, which is a pretty applicable or a pretty good name for it, because Carl Rogers did not believe that the therapist should be directing the client in any way. Then it was called client-centered before it was called person-centered, but it was changed then. So the other aspects or attributes that Carl Rogers said should come to the counseling session was the therapist's genuineness. I think he also called it congruence, or being who you really are. Congruent, being, what you portray is really who you are. That's being congruent. I love it when somebody's congruent. There are no games to be played, and it makes for a much easier relationship with someone if they are really congruent. And so it is with the therapist, that you are genuine and that you meet the client with empathetic understanding. Now, empathetic understanding needs to be accurate. In other words, you would need to question the client now and then as to, is this really what they're feeling? Is this really where they're coming from? And the thing about these three attributes is they don't mean anything to Carl Rogers unless you can accurately communicate those things back. In other words, you can communicate your unconditional positive regard. You can communicate your own genuineness and your empathetic understanding, be it accurate, of this client's subjective world. So it really, really is not an easy task to do this. I mean, this takes some real effort, some real emotional and empathetic listening. That's the reason I had you do the answer on empathetic listening in that second module. And then we move to Gestalt. Gestalt is a German word. It actually means the whole, W-H-O-L-E. And it was founded by Fritz and Laura Perls. This is a very interesting. You will grin through this demonstration with Fritz Perls. Now, you will also have to listen very carefully because his German accent really is heavy. And you'll be really interested to see Gloria's reactions to Fritz Perls. They were both, Fritz and Laura, in the theater and arts, and so they definitely bring a love of theater and of the arts into therapy. And you'll see that with some of the role-playing they ask clients to do, with some of the experiments that go on, and some of the techniques. So while person-centered, and existential doesn't really have that many techniques, so to speak, you find techniques definitely in Gestalt therapy. I think you're going to like it. And the thing about the whole, W-H-O-L-E, the Gestalt, is that it's made up of parts. Now there's a book that I love that is sort of based in Gestalt that's by Irving Polster, and this book is called A Population of Selves. And basically what Fritz Perls and Laura believed was that that we actually have parts of ourselves or selves within our own personality that relate to the whole person. And I have here the top dog, underdog, because this was a pretty famous relationship or parts piece that Fritz Perls used. He would actually have your top dog come out and meet your underdog. And one might be sitting in one chair and one might be sitting in the other chair, and you would actually, as a client, speak to that top dog, or that part of yourself that is the more dominant part, and the part of yourself that is sort of the non-dominant part would ask it questions. Theater, there it is in Fritz Perls. There are some concepts in Gestalt that are in your PowerPoint presentation that I won't spend a lot of time in right now, but that you definitely need to associate with Gestalt therapy. And as I mentioned earlier, both these two people applied their love of arts and theater to therapy. And here again, I would caution you not to think that what you see from Fritz Perls in the video is what is actually used today. It's a very different softened form. In fact, Laura Perls came along and softened Fritz Perls and made it just a little bit less antagonistic with the client. I would say that there's something really, really important about Gestalt and being in the here and now. While we bring things from our past, the emphasis in Gestalt therapy is how that is brought out in your life in the here and now. And in therapy, you might even ask somebody a question about how something relates into their life today, not just today, but in this very moment, in the session. And so there's a lot of in the here and now in Gestalt therapy. And an example of an experiment in Gestalt therapy might relate to just that. Where are you feeling this emotion? If a client says, well, I'm really afraid to go out in public, well, where are you feeling this in your body? I mean, where is that? So body awareness comes into therapy. And so if you get the client to tell you where they're feeling it, you would actually, as an experiment, have them give it an image, give it a personality, give it a color, give it some kind of personification so that you can actually sit it in a chair or sit it across from you and ask it questions. This fear. What do you want from me? What would my life be like if you weren't here? What can I do so that you and I, fear, can live together in harmony? That's fodder for a fabulous counseling session and allows a client to really go deep into their fear, understand it, meet it at the door, as I always say. Let's meet this at the door, and work with it so that it can remain in their lives, because we will probably never get rid of our fear. Sometimes it's healthy to have it. But to live with it in balance is really important. So Gestalt brings around those experimental and those ways of dealing with that. And let me give you another example of what might be an experiment. If the client mentions something about, I felt like a 6-year-old when this happened. Oh, well, let's talk about this. In fact, let's let you be the 6-year-old, and let's play that role out, play that out. There's also, from a multicultural aspect for Gestalt, if a role that you might want to assign to a client is something about their mother or their father, in some cultures it's very, very unacceptable to dishonor your mother or father, even in language. So that's something that would not be applied or would not be good to use from a technique standpoint, from a multicultural standpoint. Okay, so the experiments are unique to the client. The techniques, top dog, underdog, those kinds of things, are more universal. And here we see, since Carl Jung started talking about dreams, we see dreams, weaving themselves through Adlerian, weaving themselves through Existential. But in Gestalt, because of Fritz Perls' theater, his propensity to use things from the theater, he would actually have someone enact the dream and report it as though it's happening in the here and now. Report that dream here. Let's act it out. What did you act like? Show me how you acted in that dream. And from a client's behaviors, movements, you actually notice things and ask them about it. If a client says something to you like, I got really angry about that, and they're smiling about it, you bring that out and you say, well, I noticed something about that statement. You're talking about being angry, yet you are smiling. That's an incongruent affect, or, you wouldn't get the client on the defensive and say, well, that's incongruent, don't act like that. But you would notice it, and you would have the client explain, well, I'm smiling about it because I don't think it's acceptable for me to be that angry. So you talk about that. So along with that, you notice the language, the nonverbal language that the client is actually using. And Gestalt is sort of known not for asking why, but for asking what and how. What is going on in your life right now? And it also uses the Martin Buber I-thou relationship from a counselor role standpoint. So it's the first psychotherapy as well that is known for giving homework. Now, a person today might be using existential and person-centered therapy and give homework at the same time. But back in Fritz Perls' day, homework had not been given to a client before. Certainly when we get into Module 5 on cognitive behavioral, there's homework all over the place. You're giving the client something. Let's say you enacted something in the session, so the homework might be, can you go out and enact that same emotion or use that same language out in the world, and then report back to see how it went. So those are your highlights. Certainly what I've given you here from a highlights standpoint does not cover the entire, there are several slides in the Existential Humanistic PowerPoint presentation. And as always, there's information in the notes sections that you need to know. But this is just a little highlight, and I honestly wanted to spend a little bit of time, especially on the Existential, because I'm so inclined to use it in my own therapeutic sessions. So let's talk about the multicultural aspects of these, as of course you know we would. There are more strengths and weaknesses listed in your PowerPoint presentation that's in D2L, but I would tell you that because Existential gets in that subjective world of the client and discusses the client's worldview, it is very, very strong from a multicultural aspect, and the only reason you might not use it at all is if somebody might need structure. There's not a lot of structure associated with it, but you can bring structure in through using techniques from other therapies and use an integrated approach, which most counselors do today. Person-centered, of all of the therapies we have studied thus far, and of so many that you will study in the future in this course, it is probably the most closely associated with a strength in multicultural counseling, that fourth force. It's been applied worldwide. Carl Rogers, in his later years, used his person-centered therapeutic approach to hopefully cause and forge peace where peace was not happening. And he went to over 30 countries to take this view, this worldview. And his books have been translated into 12 languages. So of all of the therapies that we will study, this one has the strongest set of strengths or set of attributes in the multicultural aspect. And because Gestalt uses those parts of ourselves, we can also separate our culturally learned polarities or selves along with the other selves. So it is very strong also from that standpoint. And the weaknesses you see here, Existential not only from a structure standpoint, but, making meaning in our lives is a whole lot easier if we are not a victim of oppression or abuse. Some circumstances are not self-chosen, and it doesn't matter how you try to make meaning in your life. If you're being abused, you're not going to self-actualize yourself. So some circumstances are not self-chosen. That's a weakness from a multicultural aspect. A person-centered weakness would be that some cultures actually de-emphasize self-actualization. It's about the community. It's the collectivist view. It's not the individualist view. And as I mentioned before, some norms culturally may disallow some role-playing, especially if it's parental, also disallowing a show of your real feelings. So there we have it. We've talked about the founders. Your PowerPoint presentation will address all of these bullets here, the basic assumptions, the key concepts, and the primary techniques or approach, if you're talking about Existential, and role of the counselor, and the multicultural considerations. So enjoy the study, and the open forum is there if you have any questions about going forward, and good luck on the midterm, and then good luck on Module 4 assessment. Thanks.